Our mother was never a superstitious woman, but she knew how to tell a good story. When my little sister and I misbehaved, Mum would come up with creative ways to keep us in check. "What do you mean you've never heard of the laundry goblin?" she might ask, the corners of her mouth betraying a smirk that the rest of her face tried desperately to conceal. "Surely you've seen him. He hides under piles of dirty clothes and snatches your ankles when you walk by. That's why it's so important to put your clothes in the hamper, where they belong." She would tell us about the spiders that lay eggs in children's mouths, but only when they forget to brush their teeth. Once, we learned that witches love vegetables. If we didn't finish our peas and carrots, they would come and eat it out of your garbage before their main course. Two delicious children. Mum's stories were creepy, sure, but always fantastical and full of motherly theatrics. Her hands often turned to claws, her voice dropping several octaves to embody the monster of the week. Even from a young age, we knew it was all make-believe. Or at least, we were pretty sure. No matter how much we would giggle, roll our eyes, we didn't want to risk inviting the laundry goblin into our bedroom. So, we obeyed. Mum was a lot of things, mischievous and thrilling and loving all at once. She wore her heart on her sleeve, and I think that's why she was such a bad actress. She would come up with new stories and convince herself that she could fool us, but she could never keep a straight face. I think that's why Lydia and I both knew that something was different the first time she warned us about the streetlights. "Kids," she said, seating herself at the foot of Lydia's bed after tucking us in. "I want to talk to you about something. It might sound strange or a little bit silly, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" We nodded. Mum's expression was serious, but not the faux seriousness that we were used to. This felt genuine. I glanced over at Lydia. Her mouth was curved in a slight grin, most likely out of habit, but her eyes showed nothing but concern. Our mother continued speaking. "Well, you kids are getting older, and with age comes certain freedoms. You both have friends of your own. You'll go out and play with them, and I won't always be there with you. And that's okay." A forced smile crossed her face as she patted Lydia on the knee. "Now, we've already talked about how you should always be home by sunset. That hasn't changed. However, if you lose track of time, I want you to pay close attention to the streetlights." She paused. Even though I didn't know what she wanted to say, I could tell she was struggling with how to say it. I looked over at Lydia once more. Her grin was replaced by a furrowed brow. "If you're ever walking under a streetlight and it goes out, do not turn around. Don't run, and don't make any loud sounds. In fact, it's probably best not to speak at all. Just come straight home, lock the front door, and go to bed. Don't look outside. Okay?" Wondering where she was going with this, I let out an uncomfortable chuckle. "This is not a joke, David." Our mother was staring daggers at me. "I pray to God it never happens, but if it does, you make sure you don't look behind you. Swear to me you'll do exactly as I say." We nodded again. "Any questions?" Mum asked, looking back and forth between Lydia and me. We shook our heads. I think we each had plenty of questions, but no idea where to begin. Mum read us a story from one of our favourite books and kissed us on the foreheads before leaving the room. Lydia and I whispered back and forth late into the night, talking about streetlights and asking each other all of the questions we should have asked our mother. We speculated about what could be lurking in the dark and why we weren't allowed to look at it. We cracked a few jokes about some of our more ridiculous theories. Though we forced ourselves to laugh, I know neither of us really thought it was funny. Our conversation eventually gave way to an uncomfortable silence. "David," Lydia said after a few minutes. Though she only said my name, I could hear the fear in her voice. "Yeah." "That was weird." "Yeah." I don't know if Lydia got any sleep that night, but I know I didn't. I stared at the ceiling until the glow of the streetlights outside our bedroom window gave way to the break of dawn. Life continued on as normal for a while. Mum went back to her ridiculous nighttime fables, but every now and then we were subjected to another warning about the streetlights. The tone was always the same as the first night, but our fear gradually dissolved. It was just another routine to remember. Make your bed in the morning. Don't watch TV past 7 p.m. Don't look behind you if a streetlight goes out. Lydia and I also became more comfortable asking questions. "What if the light just flickers and comes back on?" "Don't risk it. Just come straight home and don't turn around." "What happens if we turn around?" "Don't." Several months passed before these rules were put to the test. Halloween was always my favorite holiday, and my mum had surprised me with a Ninja Turtle costume that we couldn't afford the previous year. Lydia had insisted on dressing up as Chewbacca, despite the costume store cashier's insistence that she would make an adorable Princess Leia. Mum took us trick-or-treating that night, as she did every year. She told us that we had to stay in our neighborhood, but I begged and begged her to take us to Willowbrook Lane. "Please, Mum," I said. I think I literally fell to my knees as any dramatic 8-year-old would. "They give out the best candy." As soon as Lydia heard this, she joined me in begging. Our mother finally relented, but only on the condition that we would return home by sunset. Unfortunately for us, the rich folks on Willowbrook Lane had caught on to their reputation. House after house, we watched as the local kids in their undoubtedly expensive costumes received candy bars as big as their faces, while we were lucky to get more than a piece of hard candy that you might find in a retirement home. Mum noticed my disappointment and reluctantly agreed to travel down one more block than we had originally agreed upon. It finally felt like our efforts had paid off when the nice couple at the end of the road brandished a basket full of king-sized chocolate bars and told us each to take 3. "Alright guys, it's time to head home. What do you say?" Our mother called from the sidewalk. We both lit out the most enthusiastic thank you of our childhood lives. Lydia, unable to contain her excitement, began to skip back to our mother, before losing her footing at the edge of the front porch. Her knees met the concrete sidewalk below. She was silent for a moment, before lifting the furry legs of her costume and seeing blood trickling down her shins. She let out a wail. Mum rushed over immediately, as did the elderly couple. The man retreated inside to grab some band-aids, while his wife stroked Lydia's hair and told her everything would be just fine. I could tell she wasn't seriously hurt, but I hated seeing my little sister in pain. After a few minutes of waiting, the man returned outside. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I think we may have run out. I'll check in with the Martins next door. I'm sure they have some." Mum glanced at the sky, then at her watch. "No, really, it's fine. Thank you so much for checking. We need to get home now anyway. It's just a couple of scratches." "They've got 3 kids of their own. I'm sure they have plenty lying around. I'll just be a moment." "No," our mother replied curtly. "Thank you, really. We need to go." She grabbed us both by the wrists and we started making our way in the direction we had come. Lydia used her free hand to wipe away her tears as she continued to sniffle. Mum's pace became more frantic as we walked. "I knew we should have headed home earlier. I knew it." "Mum," Lydia cried out, "I can't go this fast. It really hurts." Without a word, Mum hoisted Lydia onto her back and began walking even faster. My short legs were moving twice as fast as hers, just to keep up. I could see the panic in my mum's face as the sun started to fade behind the treetops. When we were roughly halfway home, the streetlights finally clicked on. "Shit," she said. "Shit, shit, shit." I hadn't heard Mum curse in ages. I thought about playfully calling her out, but I realized it wasn't a good time. "How much further?" Lydia asked. 10 minutes, maybe. I don't know." Just as Mum replied, the moment we had been preparing for arrived. The street light over our heads flickered a few times, then shut off with a hum. I stopped in my tracks and she yanked me forward immediately. "Do not turn around, heads forward. Everything will be fine." We walked for another minute or two, and I quickly realized that we were alone. Our neighborhood wasn't very densely populated, but it was still unsettling that no one else was in eyesight. It was Halloween and the sun hadn't even fully set yet. As we made the final turn onto our street, I heard footsteps approaching from behind us. "Mum," I said. "I'm scared." "It's just another family," she said. "Just keep looking forward." I didn't believe her. I don't think she believed herself. I don't know who was behind us, but it was clearly only one set of footsteps. She moved her right hand from my wrist to the back of my head. Her touch was gentle but firm. I knew that if I even came close to looking behind me, she'd snap me back into position immediately. Her pace slowed. Every step felt deliberate, like she didn't want to agitate something. We walked home without another word. Lydia didn't stop crying. I don't know if it was fear or pain. Probably both. The footsteps continued behind us all the way to our front door. We rushed inside, our mother only opening the door wide enough for us to slip through. "Eyes closed," she said sternly as we met the warm air of our home. We listened as she fumbled around the dark living room, closing the blinds and drawing the curtains. I'm sure her eyes were closed too. When the entire house was sealed from the outside world, Mum patched and cleaned Lydia's knees before we settled in for a movie. We quietly sorted and traded candy for a while before Lydia finally spoke. "Mum, what was behind us?" I remember thinking it was strange that she said what and not who. "I don't know," Mum said, rubbing our backs. "You guys did good though. Really good." We didn't talk much about that Halloween in the following years. Mum assured us that as long as we followed her instructions, we had nothing to worry about. "I know it's scary," she'd say, "but I promise you'll be safe as long as you don't turn around." I once asked if other families knew about this or if we needed to warn them. She told me that, as far as she knew, it was something only our family had to worry about. I asked her if anyone had ever turned around. "Yeah," she answered, refusing to meet my gaze. "What happened to them?" "I wish I knew." When I was a junior in high school, Mum got a new job and we moved to a bigger house on the other side of town. Lydia and I no longer had to share a bedroom. I pretended to be excited about that, but I missed our late-night talks. I'd often wonder if she did too. I was athletic enough to join the school football team, but not athletic enough to ever actually play. Lydia, now a high school freshman, was poised to become a star cheerleader. I think we both tried to stay close, but we inevitably grew apart as teenage siblings often do. One Friday night in late October, my friend Simon stumbled toward me in the locker room after a home game against our rival school. He was grinning at me, but also looking right through me. "You see that fucking catch, man?" he asked, swaying side to side in a way that was almost imperceptible. "Coach said college scouts would be here tonight." He pointed both of his thumbs toward his chest. "Your boy is gonna be pro one day." He reached into his duffel bag and pulled out 2 shooters of vodka. "Let's celebrate." "I'm alright, man." I finished changing out of my uniform and grabbed my bag. As I moved toward the exit, Simon grabbed me by the shoulder and spun me around. "Where are you going?" he slurred. "You know I'm your ride home." I shrugged my shoulders. "It's a nice night. We'll walk." Simon muttered something in response. I think I heard the word pussy, then drowned both shooters. I turned toward him and suggested that he walk with us. "And what? Leave my car at school? My parents will know something's up." I shrugged my shoulders and told him to get home safe. He scoffed and procured 2 more shooters from his bag as we both left the locker room. Moments later, I met up with Lydia by the stadium entrance. "Our ride fell through," I told her, not slowing my pace. "We're walking." Lydia jogged to catch up with me. She anxiously glanced at the night sky and the illuminated streetlights overhead. "What do you mean? I really don't think that's a good idea." "Simon's drunk," I told her. A wave of concern washed over her face. "Can't we just ask someone else?" she begged. "We're less than 2 miles from home. We'll be there in 20 minutes. It's really not a big deal." We walked for a moment in silence. "Don't you remember that Halloween?" she asked. I laughed. "Yeah, I remember. I remember Mum had a couple of drinks herself that night. You really think there's someone out there, making the streetlights go out, wanting to kill us, but only if we turn around?" She didn't respond. We walked in silence for a while. As we passed City Park on our right, I noticed how quiet everything was. The air felt heavy. "You don't think it's weird that Mum warned us, and then the streetlight actually went out?" "Of course I think that's weird. I think Mum says a lot of weird things." "Maybe we should just call her." Instead of answering, I pulled out my phone to check for messages. My only notification was a low battery warning. As I was looking down, I noticed a flicker in my periphery. Lydia stopped walking. "Fuck this. Fuck this." I had never heard her curse before. "What?" I asked, pretending I wasn't scared. She gestured toward a streetlight, maybe 50 feet ahead. "It's going to happen again. Can we please just call someone?" At that moment, a light illuminated us from behind. We both kept our eyes pointed straight ahead as a brand new BMW pulled up next to us, one of its tires thudding against the curb. A window rolled down. "You sure you want to walk?" Simon called out. "Yeah," I said. "We're good." "Suit yourselves." He threw up his middle finger and sped off, weaving between lanes of traffic. "Let's go," I said, and we carried on. Sure enough, as soon as we passed beneath the streetlight, it flickered once more, before extinguishing completely. "David!" Lydia cried out, as she grabbed my hand. "I don't want to do this." "We're not far," I said. "Nothing's going to happen." We trudged forward, and I was grateful that the silence continued. Unfortunately, that didn't last. As we turned from Main Street into our neighborhood, Lydia gasped. "Do you hear that?" The footsteps sounded distant, but they were undeniable. "It's Friday night," I said in a hushed whisper. "It's just another person trying to get home." Whoever was behind us seemed to be matching our pace. I made an effort to step more quietly so that my own footsteps wouldn't drown them out. It carried on for several moments before I realized the footsteps were growing closer. She didn't say a word, but I know Lydia noticed it too. We kept walking. My skin felt cold. Lydia was beginning to hyperventilate. We finally turned onto our street. Only a half-mile or so to go. "David," she pleaded. "I can feel it breathing on me." The footsteps were incredibly close now. I felt as if whoever was behind us might step on the heel of my shoe at any moment, or worse. "Please go away," Lydia cried out. She was no longer talking to me. The footsteps continued, closer than ever. "You see that tree up ahead?" I asked, gesturing to an imposing willow down the road. "We passed that, and we're practically there. Round that corner and we can see our house." Just as I thought about calling 911, or our mother, or anyone, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I knew what had happened, but I retrieved it just to confirm. It was dead. "Lydia," I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, "hand me your phone." She didn't respond to my request. Instead, she started sobbing. "David, I think it's pulling me." I tightened my grip around her wrist. "Nothing is pulling you. We're almost home. Just keep looking forward." Her sobbing continued. "What the fuck do you want?" she shouted through tears. She was gasping for air at this point. "What the fuck do you want?" The final word of her plea echoed through our neighborhood as she broke free from my grasp and spun around. I couldn't bring myself to look at her, much less behind me. There was a sudden emptiness to my side, where she had been moments before. I closed my eyes, but didn't dare break my stride. Tears streamed down my face as I carried on towards home. I no longer heard Lydia's labored breathing, her sobs, her cries for reassurance. All I could hear were two sets of footsteps, walking calmly and methodically behind me. "Lydia," I called out. "Are you all right? Please, say something." I begged repeatedly for an answer as I made my way home. But my desperation was met with silence. My followers carried on behind me, matching my pace and refusing to say a word. "This isn't funny," I shouted, though I knew no one was joking. After a few minutes that felt like hours, I breached the threshold to our home and slammed the door behind me. I closed my eyes and fumbled through the darkness to ensure that the blinds were closed and that I wouldn't be exposed to whatever was outside. I immediately plugged my phone into its charger and tried to call Lydia as soon as it returned to life. Straight to voicemail. "What's going on?" My mother had emerged in her nightgown, a glass of wine in her hand. "Where's Lydia?" I searched for the words, but they wouldn't come. I gestured towards the front door, shaking my head back and forth. I'm sorry," was all I could say through my tears. The realization set into her face almost immediately. "She turned around?" she asked. I stared at the floor beneath me, not saying a word. She fell to the floor, and so did her glass of wine, shattering at her feet. She covered her face with her hands and let out a scream. To this day, I've never heard anything like it. I wanted to hug her, to hold her, but I was frozen. My mother pounded the floor with her hands until the blood dripped from them, shards of glass protruding from her palms and knuckles. "What do we do?" I finally choked out. "She's gone, baby," she answered. "She's gone." We held each other and cried through the night. She made me tell her everything that had happened, since the end of the game. "We're going to have to make a police report," she told me. "We can't tell them the truth. They'll think you did something. I'm not losing both of my babies." We came up with a story together. Originally, I suggested that we tell the police I never saw Lydia after the game. My mother said that the other students or parents may have seen us leave the stadium together. Simon, despite his drunkenness, might remember seeing us on Main Street. I would have to tell them that she had insisted on walking to a friend's house, and that we had parted ways at some point on the walk home. It was best if she had never told me which friend, my mother had said. When Lydia didn't come home from her imaginary sleepover, my mother called a few of Lydia's friends' parents, feigning a tone of calm concern. "She wasn't at your house last night?" she'd ask. Tears pounded down her cheeks, but you wouldn't know it from her voice. Eventually, she called the police. "I'm sure she's fine," she lied. "It's just, her phone seems to be dead, and we haven't heard from her. We just want to make sure she's fine." The following weeks and months were characterized by an uncomfortable combination of mourning and lying. We didn't know that Lydia was dead, per se, but Mum was convinced that she wasn't coming back to us. I never doubted her. The town's police force hosted search parties. We showed up, feigning enthusiasm and hopefulness, knowing that all of it was for nothing. Behind closed doors, my mother and I wept as we tried to accept the truth that we couldn't share with anyone else. There was a strange relief when the rest of the town started to give up. The search parties became less frequent until they stopped altogether. I was just happy to stop wasting everyone's time and felt freedom in my ability to mourn publicly. Mum was never the same again. She stopped going to work and started drinking more than I had ever seen. She had to sell the house, and we moved back to our old neighborhood, into a house even smaller than the one I grew up in. She never stopped being my mother, of course. She was physically present for all of my major events and ceremonies, but she was never really there. Her whimsy and infectious love of life was gone, and it wasn't just because I was older. I often wondered if she wished she was dead. I graduated high school and got into a good college, decent grades, a mediocre athletic career. A heartbreaking essay about a missing sister, and an alcoholic mother will do that, I guess. I picked up a few bad habits myself in the following years. I drank constantly, smoked way too much weed, and skipped most of my classes. By the time I started my junior year, I was on academic probation. I wasn't exactly careful about the streetlights either. Until the night that Lydia disappeared, I had been careful to never walk around after sunset. In my little college town, however, I was stumbling home from the bars at 2 a.m. on a regular basis. For over 4 years, the streetlights stayed on. I often fantasized about what I would do if they didn't. And maybe if I turned around next time, I could find out what happened to her. And maybe I could be with my sister again. December rolled around. I dreaded going home for winter break. I dreaded the thought of facing my mother and her emptiness. I dreaded the thought of having to hide my drinking from her, though I knew she would probably be too drunk herself to notice. After finishing my finals for the fall semester, I decided to step out of my comfort zone and go to a house party. I wasn't even invited, but I wandered in and helped myself to punch and cigarettes from friendly strangers, pretending to be a friend of a friend of a friend. I spent the entire night standing in the backyard, smoking and drinking, and hardly saying a word to anyone. When the world began spinning around me, I zipped up my coat and started making my way back to my dingy apartment. It took me an embarrassingly long time to find my way out of the neighborhood I was in and back to the town's main thoroughfare. I had no clue how much time had passed. I retrieved my phone from my coat pocket to check. Dead, as it ever was. It was rare that I found myself on this side of town, but the way home seemed easy enough. Even as inebriated as I was, I knew it was just a few miles down MLK Boulevard, and my apartment complex would be impossible to miss. After several minutes of walking, I crested a hill and looked upon a bus stop a few hundred yards ahead of me. The glass-sheltered bench was illuminated by a streetlight above. The sight was strangely intoxicating. My own little suburban oasis. I decided that I would have a seat when I reached it and pray for the spins to go away. Maybe stick a finger down my throat and purge some of the vodka that was sloshing around inside me. That plan was quickly foiled as I got closer. When I was about 100 feet away, the streetlight above the bus stop turned off without so much as a flicker. I stopped walking. For years I had convinced myself that I was no longer afraid, that I was too dead inside to care about what might happen to me. I immediately realized I had been full of shit. I was terrified. My breathing became labored and my fingers twitched with anticipation. Does this even count? I wasn't beneath the streetlight when it went out. Could I just turn around and go back to the house party? No, I couldn't do that. What if it was already behind me? In spite of my intuition telling me to turn and run, I carried on. As I approached spitting distance of the glass enclosure, I heard the unmistakable sound of a bus arriving. Wasn't it too late for the campus buses to be running? Or had I stayed out so late that I was witnessing the first loop? The bus grinded to a halt, just as I passed the bench. I so desperately wished I could sit down and cry and vomit and do whatever else my body wanted me to do. I heard the hydraulic sound of the bus doors opening, followed by a single set of footsteps disembarking onto the sidewalk. I was prepared to be accompanied by that sound and nothing more for the remainder of my walk, when a voice called out to me. "David?" A shiver crept down my spine. I knew that voice. It sounded older and more mature than the last time I had heard it, but familiar nonetheless. The footsteps broke into a jog until she was just behind me. "Is that really you?" Lydia's voice pierced my skin. I said nothing and continued walking forward. I watched as the bus rolled past on my left. It was full. The silhouettes of its many passengers stared forward, unmoving. "David, what's wrong? Aren't you going to turn around?" Maybe this was all a misunderstanding. Maybe Lydia had pulled a prank on me and our mother 4 years ago before running away. Maybe she was ready to come home. I shook my head, as if to extinguish that thought. It was crazy, but wasn't the alternative even crazier? "I missed you," she called. "I'm sorry I left." I finally responded. "Please stop this." Lydia laughed. "Oh, good. I was worried you might have lost your voice. Can you please just look at me? We should catch up." "Whatever you are, please stop this." She scoffed. "Whatever you are? Are you fucking kidding me? I'm your baby sister. Do you even care? Do you even want to know where I've been?" "No," I said. "Not really." "You're a piece of shit, David. You always have been. No wonder you and Mum never really looked for me." I walked in silence for a few minutes, hearing nothing but the footsteps carrying on behind me. I realized that, besides the bus, I hadn't seen a single vehicle or person on this entire walk. Even at that hour, That seemed strange. I'm sorry, David. I didn't mean it. I've really missed you. Again, I said nothing. I'm so cold. Do you have a cigarette? She asked. You don't smoke. We haven't seen each other in years. How would you know? We were now passing the dorm that I had lived in during my first year of college. I thought maybe I could go knock on the door and find a student to let me in. I wondered what would happen if they saw her behind me. Would they see anything at all? I decided against it. My mother's words echoed in my mind from that very first night. Do not turn around. Mum was wrong, you know, Lydia said. It sounded like she was grinning as she spoke. It's beautiful here. I can show you. I gritted my teeth and squinted my eyes. I know you're not Lydia. Please go away. Then who the fuck am I? The voice was different this time, as if another voice was buried within, as if Lydia was just a mask. For the next 30 minutes or so, my follower continued to beg in my baby sister's voice for me to turn around. Its tone alternated between anger, grief, desperation, and wonder, as if it couldn't decide on a strategy to manipulate me. When I finally reached the front door of my apartment, I paused before turning the key. Are you going to follow me in? I would love to come in. I opened the door and lowered my head. If I was going to die, I wanted it to be on my terms. I stepped inside and waited. Can I come in? I've been so cold, she said. I slammed the door behind me and fell to the floor, my arms covering my face. I gripped tufts of my own hair and pulled, thinking that physical pain might be a welcome distraction. I breathed a sigh of relief. I made it. Then the knocking started. David, please. You don't know what it's been like. Let me in. You are not welcome here. I'm still your sister, David. Please. I called out for my roommate, Nick, before remembering that he had already returned home for winter break. You don't need him. You need me. Go away, I'm begging you. Did you even know it's your birthday? What happened to you? She was right. Happy 21st to me, I guess. I thought about finally trashing my fake ID and chuckled to myself. I got you a present. You're going to love it. I was alone in my apartment, but I started to feel as if someone was pulling me upwards, silently convincing me to give her a chance. Would she look different? Would it look like her at all? I pounded my fist against my forehead a few times and stood up fully before storming into my bedroom. I hastily closed the door and locked it behind me. The apartment was old and its walls were thin. The pounding on my front door didn't sound any quieter from here. It's been 3 days now. I haven't eaten. I haven't slept. I couldn't even if I wanted to. I was grateful to have 2 large water bottles on my nightstand. A preemptive measure for hangover control, but those were depleted quickly. I can't leave my bedroom. There's a window inches from my front door, and the curtains are wide open. I know I don't have the strength to keep my eyes closed. Why has no one checked on me? Classes are over, sure, but someone has to be looking for me. Someone has been knocking on my door for 3 days straight, and no one has called the cops or even stopped to ask questions. My phone is dead, and the charger is in the living room. My laptop is here, but the Wi-Fi is disconnected. Did I forget to pay the bill? I've tried screaming at the top of my lungs and banging on the wall what I share with the neighboring unit, to no avail. I'm so thirsty. Am I dying? I think I'm seeing things. There's a pile of dirty laundry in the corner of my room. Was that there before? I swear to God, I think I see a pair of eyes peeking through it. I can hear my sister outside. She says she's come to surprise me at school. I've really missed her, and she says she's missed me too. Feels like I haven't seen her in ages. I think we're going to grab some coffee in a moment. And water. Lots and lots of water. Nick, if you find this before I get back home, don't worry. I'll be back soon. I can't wait for you to meet my sister. If my mum calls, tell her everything's going to be fine. I'm going somewhere with Lydia. Somewhere beautiful. Hello, sinister listeners. If you've enjoyed this story, then you'll find all the author's information in the description below. For more content, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to succumb to the sinister.